Okay, there we go. Sorry, everyone, just give us another minute while we get onto the screen. Oh, we're all set. Perfect. Okay, we all set?
Yes, it's on Facebook. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. So let me officially call this meeting of the Joint Enforcement Task Force to order. I just want to say thank you. It's our last meeting of the 2024 calendar year. There's been a tremendous amount of hard work by everyone. We are excited and we want to use, we've heard from experts around the state, researchers, small business owners, MBEs, unions, worker centers, and workers themselves about the impact that workplace fraud has on businesses and workers in Maryland and on our economy. So today we're going to, as all of you recall, we have a report due at the end of the year. Staff has been hard at work on drafting that. We are going to use the meeting today to focus on a high-level overview of the findings so far and really use this for discussion. Task force members had a prior outline or certain points that were sent around. Some of you have responded to those, but we know you may not have had as much time to focus on it. So today we wanted to walk through those. I also wanted to reiterate the call for data. I believe some of the participating agencies have already provided some really useful information and data, but if you have further updates or other refinements to that, Sapna Mehta, who's on virtually, is our point person. Send those things to her and Ashley, please, so we're aware of tracking them and then we can incorporate them in the report. We will be working to get that drafted and work through the draft before the end of the year. So with that, let me first turn it over to Ashley to call the roll.
Yes, ma'am. So Secretary Wu, present. Comptroller Learman, we have Maria Robolino. Anyone present from the Attorney General's office? Heather,
Heather's going to be about half an hour late.
Okay, awesome. Commissioner Burke is present. Commissioner Dove is present. Assistant Secretary Torres, Chair Quinn, and as well as Stacy Roig is here as well. Maryland Insurance Administration, Robert, did I see you? Oh, we can't hear you. But I see you, okay. And Deputy Director Yeager, Bob Yeager, are you on?
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect.
Nice to see you.
You as well. And then anyone else that is here as a designee or staff member, if you guys could just come off mute and mention your names.
Good morning, everyone. Josh Greenberg here with the Department of Assessments and Taxation as well. I'm here with Deputy Director Yeager.
Thank you.
Matt Bowman with the Comptroller of Maryland with Maria Robolino.
Terry Nelson with the Comptroller of Maryland.
Sunny?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Okay, is there anyone else that we've missed?
Jenny Baker, I'm with the AG's office.
Stephen Harrington.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. I think we're all set.
Okay, great. So with that, we have a couple of slides. I know that folks haven't necessarily seen these slides before, but I will say all of the text that's in them around the proposed policy solutions, and these all came about through various discussions that we've had in the prior task force meetings. All of that should be familiar to you, just we just kind of put it into a slide format to organize our discussion a little bit. I thought we'd open up with just a little bit of background as a refresher. It should be familiar to task force members, but just wanted a bit of an overview because we've heard a lot about, as I said, we've heard from a lot of stakeholders. We've also had some analysis done. So actually, Sapna, if you're able to come off mute, if you want to walk us through some of these slides, if you don't mind, she's providing some of the sort of research and data background. Next slide.
Yes, thank you, Secretary. I'm so sorry to not be there in person. So, as the Secretary mentioned, obviously the task force has been meeting all year. We've heard from, sorry, first of all, can you see the screen okay? My view is a little bit
Yes, we
strange.
can see
Okay,
it.
great.
Yes.
So the task force has been meeting all year. We've heard from researchers, small businesses, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, unions, worker centers, workers. We held listening sessions, in focused listening sessions this fall to hear from workers and small businesses who have been impacted by workplace fraud. We heard from workers in the construction, transportation, and healthcare sector, describing how misclassification really, leaves them in precarious and vulnerable employment and financial situations. We know that when workers are misclassified, they lose access to legal protections, the minimum wage, overtime, anti-discrimination protections, access to unemployment insurance and workers' compensation. As well as any employer contributions to social insurance, like the Family and Medical Leave program that will be launching soon in Maryland. They also become responsible for shouldering the risk that employers normally take on, including employers' tax bills. We heard from small businesses, the construction MBEs and WBEs, just how misclassification really creates an unlevel playing field. Employers who want to abide by the law are really kind of forced to compete with businesses who are trying to reduce their labor costs through misclassification. And so, an analysis of the construction industry by the Century Foundation, estimates that between 15,000 and 30,000 construction workers are misclassified in Maryland. So just kind of at that midpoint of 23,000, that means an estimated, almost 11% of construction workers are misclassified. So even just looking at one sector, that's a huge impact. The same, the same analysis really.
Can I ask a question about that, Sapna? Did the report find that those employees were working for subcontractors or the generals, or is it broken down?
You know what? I don't believe that it gets into that detail, but I can go back and look at it and confirm and get back to you.
And maybe you can remind us, I know the Century Foundation had done this sort of analysis, I believe it was for DC, and they've used a similar model for Maryland. Is that where we got this information from?
Yes, I can send around the link to the report, but they did an analysis actually in Massachusetts and DC, like using data from those jurisdictions, and then they developed a model that they used to estimate across other states. And they are actually going to do are hopefully going to release a Maryland specific brief early next year as well. But I'm happy to look into those. I don't think the report went into those details, Chairwoman, but I'll look into it and confirm.
Okay, thank you.
And so we know that misclassification also has an impact on public revenue. So this kind of same analysis of the construction industry found that when construction workers are misclassified, so taxpayers lose out on unemployment insurance contributions, Social Security and Medicare contributions, and state and federal income tax. And so just misclassification in the construction industry, costs Maryland taxpayers over $128 million annually. And then, businesses that misclassify workers, they also evade paying overtime, FICA, the federal payroll tax, and workers' compensation premiums. And so that, that cost is almost $155 million annually. So it's a pretty substantial cost.
So I think what would be helpful, since this is a report done on a model, let's make sure we share it with our friends at the comptroller's office, because of the tax analysis impact. We want to make sure that if we think about putting numbers like this in the report, that you feel comfortable with the analysis.
Thank you so much. If I could have them.
Yeah, we'll make sure to send this around. Yes, and everyone will get the slides. I think they're actually out there.
Yes, definitely. I think the reports have been shared around in the past, but I know everyone is really busy. But we'll make sure to share them around again. And so then it's just, sorry, there's just so much data to make our points. Another, a different analysis conducted by the Economic Policy Institute estimates like how much workers, who experience workplace fraud lose annually. This looks at this is a national study. And so it, you can see the cost in different sectors. And so just using kind of the most conservative estimates, if businesses are classifying workers as independent contractors, and they should be employees, we're seeing a reduction in income between $4,500 to $11,000. And then if we're using still plausible but a little bit less conservative estimates, that range runs from $6,400 to $18,000 per year. We're hoping to try to replicate this in Maryland, but right now these are national numbers. And so, obviously the purpose of the task force is really to kind of work together and figure out how we can, continue to combat workplace fraud. And so kind of as the secretary mentioned, like next, we just really wanted to have a discussion on some of the policy solutions that we've, been collectively developing as a result of the meetings and stakeholder conversations, and research that we've done. And so I'll turn it back to the secretary to lead that discussion.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks for that overview. I think we did want to focus on some of the challenges and proposed solutions. I will say, obviously these aren't complete. I do know that sometimes, especially when it comes to this time of year, and especially when we have a body that's made up totally of government organizations that might be a little different. I think we understand that like no individual agency is necessarily like endorsing this as their legislative proposal. We all have, other considerations and constraints. We will be sure to couch this as like these are potential areas for actions and potential policy levers. But we did want to see if we could come to, use this time for discussion and to come to some kind of consensus and or prioritization. Because it's really important that we get that feedback before we put together the final draft, and you should be seeing the draft fairly soon. So with that, let's flip to the next slide. This is around coordinate. So we did it sort of by area, and the areas are coordinated enforcement, worker cooperation, general contract responsibility, consequences for non-compliance, creating a market that favors responsible practices, employment status. Oh my goodness, we have a lot of areas. Limitations of the workplace. Okay, so we have like 10 areas. So we're going to have to move through these pretty quickly. And actually a way to think about it also is like, is this too many, right? Is it too many ways of thinking about this? Should we focus? I'm not going to read the items. People can see them on the slides. And I just want to be sure we can see them clearly in the room. I didn't double check if everyone else on the screen, if Sapna, when you made that comment about your screen being a little funny, I want to be sure our online participants are able to see them.
Sorry, I think it's weird on my screen because I'm doing the screen sharing, so I can't see everything, but can everyone else see it okay?
Other online participants? Okay, great. You're good. I see that. Okay, good. Thank you. So the first one is on coordinated enforcement and how can we better work together. When we heard from our sister states, they definitely raised that collaboration and coordination and data sharing as being a key piece of effectiveness. I know there's work underway on signing the MOUs, and there's been this shared portal, and hopefully we'll be able to use that more fully. So let me open it up to discussion of this. Other thoughts or?
Let me just add here, I think the folks in the enforcement group have had some discussions about how to streamline, our sort of coordinated investigation processes. And since the Workplace Fraud Act is the, entry point for a number of these issues, and obviously there will be other entry points as well through UI, comptroller, workers' comp, MIA, the AG's office, any number of places, but we're working on trying to figure out ways to streamline those processes so we don't have like 6 agencies doing essentially the same investigation. That's coordinated and that we're all looking at the same thing, but that's also just sort of, creates inefficiencies in terms of using our resources. So that's an area that I think we've been discussing with some success and productivity in, the staff group that's focused on enforcement. But obviously, if there are other issues or thoughts that folks have, we would love to hear them.
I see Steve has his hand up. online. Steve?
Thanks for this. By the way, I'm sorry I'm not on camera right now. I'm actually just having a little bit of a challenge. But my one question is developing internal presumptions on what contributions back tax liabilities are owed. I'm actually more of an economic policy guy than a tax policy guy, but have we kind of dug deeper into like what that means or how that would work? I know it's a proposed solution, but I'm just curious from the comptroller's office.
Yeah, so I think, again, this is preliminary.
Yeah.
The way the Workplace Fraud Act is written, it requires, or certainly permits, and I think requires as part of the citation process that labor issues to direct the employer to, quote, come into compliance with other applicable laws. And what we have been discussing in the enforcement group meeting, Steve, is how to put meat on those bones in a meaningful way. So to the extent that, there are X number of people who, earned X number of wages over X to Y period of time, is there a way in the citation process itself to, again, create some presumptions about what would the back tax liability look like as a lower bound? What would the UI contributions unpaid look like as a lower bound? And again, this is exploratory, but something that we're considering, partly so that in order to come into compliance, the employer would actually have to come into compliance with those laws, at least at a baseline minimal level. And again, part of the issue here is trying to ensure that it's without prejudice if, for instance, one of the other agencies actually conducts a full audit and finds, that there's much more there than what our workplace fraud investigation has found. But to use our workplace fraud investigation as a baseline for at least a minimal assessment of other liabilities. It's a thought, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but that's a thought that we've been exploring.
I think it would be helpful to have sister agencies, the agencies look at whether this is possible, because I'm not sure under some of our statutes whether that works, right? So it'd be useful to understand for workers' comp or tax or UI, we have to either assess or not, and a presumption just isn't going to work for us. Or like, what is that if it's not? I'm not sure I know what an internal presumption is as opposed to a presumption, but I think that would be helpful to refine that point. Thank you for raising that question, Steve. What is the framework to make sure you open that question through the wage investigation, but also do it in an effective way that doesn't get crosswise with our other statutes?
Thank you so much. Really helpful.
This is Maureen Quinn. So the way this would play out is, so we order a company to buy workers' compensation insurance because we find that they have employees. And do you envision that we would also say, and you shall also come into compliance with other laws?
I think what we're envisioning is using the Workplace Fraud Act's existing language that requires an employer who is found to be in violation of the Workplace Fraud Act to, quote, come into compliance with other applicable laws. So if one of the ways that they would have to come into compliance is to buy sufficient, purchase sufficient workers' compensation coverage, that could be part of a citation.
Okay. The word inverse really threw me because I thought, are we all doing something or is this is just Department of Labor enforcing the Workplace Fraud Act?
So far, that's what we've talked about.
Okay.
But there could be other ways in which there's cross-cutting and collaboration. And again, I just want to emphasize, we're at the very early stages of having that discussion, but part of what we're thinking about from the labor standpoint is how to leverage essentially a workplace fraud investigation where we've already done some of that work to actually result in at least a baseline compliance with other potentially applicable laws, such as workers' comp, UI, and the tax laws. Preliminary conversation, but something that's.
So I do want to have a conversation about it here, though. I think what I'm hearing is that should it be that a solution is not just a Workplace Fraud Act citation should include, this is saying information, and I guess the question is can you say, I still don't quite understand what internal presumptions means, but that you build in and you're also, like, is there a way to kind of link them together to say you're also required to come into compliance with these other laws without each of those agencies having to take separate
Yes,
action?
that's right. I mean, the Workplace Fraud Act requires that the employer, quote, come into compliance with other applicable laws.
Right.
What we are doing is wrestling with exactly what that means and how to streamline it so that if you are found, for instance, FAR investigation determines that you had, $100,000 of unpaid of wages that were not reported, and you paid your folks $100,000 in wages in 1099 reporting. What does that mean if they were employees? Approximately how much in back taxes would be owed from that? Approximately how much in UI would be owed from that? What would be the workers' compensation consequence of that finding? And placing a requirement in the citation itself that they pay the back contributions to UI, that they pay back taxes to the comptroller, that they come into compliance by purchasing coverage under the Workers' Compensation Act. Again, it is a discussion. It is very much a work in progress, but it is a, again, potential policy solution to try to actually make, quote, coming into compliance with the law, be a meaningful directive.
So question, so basically we're just trying to figure out how to implement the law. The law is there and it says we can do this, but we haven't been doing it.
That's correct.
And I just wanted to add to what Deputy said is the citation that we are developing, that we are working on now on the enforcement group. It's really meant to sort of order the person to be in compliance, and then we do the referral. So like, as Maureen was saying, workers' comp, if we find that there's misclassification, that someone has misclassified their clearly employee as an independent contractor, at that point, they can notify my division, and then I can notify the Workplace Classification Protection Unit to do a full investigation on it. Because if we're able to take what we each find out, and that's where the portal comes in, but if we can take that and be able to spread it between all the agencies and everyone, although they don't do their own, they already know what's been found, now they can just make sure that they're in compliance.
And that's why the MOU is so critical.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I think we're at a stage of trying to share the information and say everyone else can take action. What I see on this proposed solution, though, is like sort of create a little bit more than like sort of a default action, given that the Fraud Act says you are responsible for it, but like, how do you implement that? How do you make that happen? Like, what is the step to?
I mean, our orders are public and the hearings are public. So if we find misclassification, I don't know, even know if I need an MOU. I can send it to anybody in the world, public.
We welcome it.
Yes, yeah. And I think. Really?
So that, but I take the point of, it shouldn't just come from the workplace. If there are other directions where it can also be a similar look at.
I think what this is multiple ways in which enforcement under all of our statutes that could address misclassification can be coordinated. Streamlining enforcement is one piece of it, ensuring that we are implementing to the fullest extent the remedies in the Workplace Fraud Act as they currently exist is a piece of it. Information sharing via MOU is a piece of it. Placing information from all of our agencies into the portal so that we can all see it and potentially act on it is a piece of it. I mean, it is the Joint Enforcement Task Force, and we're trying to, I think, figure out a way to do joint enforcement. And there are multiple different ways in which to coordinate. So, great.
Right. Other thoughts in this area? I mean, there's been a huge amount of work here, obviously. Maybe we can go to the next slide, which is very closely tied to this, which is worker cooperation and investigations. I think this one, perhaps especially now, we want to think about these challenges could be very real already, and I think we know there could be greater fear of deportation, and it's possible there may be some changes to some of the existing provisions that enable or support workers coming forward. We don't, there could be greater incentives for workers to cooperate with workplace fraud investigations. For example, if workers got an additional penalty payment to them. Other thoughts here? Open it up.
So I believe that,
Yeah.
and this is something, Devki started and worked a little bit on it too. The deferred action for people who are part of an investigation, workers who are part of a workplace investigation, and how can we exponentially make that bigger, right? Now that
I think we're gonna, no, I mean, we don't control that, the feds do.
yeah, I know that.
So I
but like,
think,
but what about the,
Statement of interest.
yes, we've
Yes.
used the statement, we
That's what I'm
issued that
talking about.
statement of interest, I don't know how often people are using it, but again, if that program goes away, we won't be able to use it anymore.
okay, it could go away.
I don't know, but.
I mean, I think we just don't know what's going to happen, and the existing administration was very open to ensuring that, states and local governments could effectively enforce their laws, all of their laws, including their labor laws, without regard to the immigration status of the affected workers. And we obviously are in a holding pattern, not knowing at this point, whether that policy decision is going to hold through the next administration in Washington, since it's DHS who really is the one who processes sorry, losing my words, processes those. I think we don't.
Have we had a lot of uptake of it? Yeah. I think this is a tough nut to crack, but I mean, we really welcome other thoughts. These are,
The landscape has changed so much.
yeah, these are more legislative thoughts perhaps, but there can be others, right? That are, around trust building or, working with community organizations, obviously. Yeah.
Thinking about a documented worker who says, oh, I can make some big money. I'm on a construction site and we've got 150 undocumented workers here. And I'm gonna make a whole lot of money because I'm gonna turn them all in.
Absolutely.
I never would have thought of that scenario, 2 months ago. But a lot has changed.
I believe that, I mean, and I think we heard this from Minnesota, like the type of partnerships that they codified in law with unions, with worker centers, like, I wonder, I mean, these are the places where undocumented folks are gonna go to, and the trust building is there. We need to have those partnerships not only established, but codified, and that's what worked in Minnesota really well, so I wonder if we could, explore that. And beyond unions, worker centers, nonprofits, community organizations.
Sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand with the screen sharing. It's my own inability to use technology, but I just wanted to say, I think we put it on there because we wanted to name it. It's been an issue and it's going to be an even bigger issue. And I know not a lot of it is really in the hands of state agencies or even for the state legislature, but just wanted to mostly just name it and put it out there so that we didn't, gloss over it since it is a big challenge.
Any other comments or thoughts? I think this one is going to be a little bit challenging. Commissioner, I hear what you're saying. I hadn't thought of it that way. I see what you mean. I think we thought about benefited workers.
I did, yeah.
Being able to get an additional payment. But I hear what you're saying that. I mean, I still think this is about, there would have to be fraud, but if a documented worker, comes forward, they're of course getting the additional, they would just be getting the additional penalties because of the workplace fraud consequence, but you're right, it could be exposing a lot of other people too. I see what you're saying. So maybe some concern about this idea.
Yeah, I mean, again, there are ways in which to draft it. The point here is not to provide a bounty for people to expose folks who are not documented, but to encourage, provide an incentive to encourage workers who are being misclassified to come forward, because there are a number of financial incentives, at least in the short term, right, to being misclassified, and that there's no tax taken out, there's no, there's no FICA Medicare hit, there's a no number of different things. So there's more cash in hand.
But that then becomes the dilemma, because all those workers are exposed. Let's just forget deportation and all that. Let's just pretend the universe is how it was. They all get exposed, but they can't be hired as W-2 employees. So you're never going to be able to get them into the system. And now we're, to the point where, well, these people are off the work, out of our workforce, like completely, or off the construction site, or whatever happens to them, because we can't make a deal.
Right, understood. I mean, again, I think the thought here, which is something that we've seen for both documented and undocumented workers.
Yeah.
That people are generally reluctant to come forward when they are misclassified because of the financial incentives, because of a number of reasons, financial incentives to being misclassified, at least in the short term. Having a job and fear of retaliation, fear of not getting the next job with the same contractor, if we're talking construction. So there are a number of different potential issues, and it is difficult to get workers, at least we have found, to actually talk with our investigators. And, to Maria's point, probably another thing that should be on here is the issue that the secretary and you have raised about collaborating with trusted partners and ambassadors, which has been used to significant effect, again, with all groups of workers in our states.
Okay. Food for thought. I see the potential incentives and disincentives, so we'll have to kind of think about how we craft that. But we will be, refining these ideas, putting them in the draft, and so people will also have a chance to kind of comment on a physical narrative as well. I'm gonna keep us moving if I could. I just want to make sure I don't have any hands on the screen. General contract responsibility. I know in the MBE meeting, this came up a bit. It's come up numerous times in a lot of our discussions. I'm sorry, the AG's team is not here.
They joined about 20 minutes ago.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that that's helpful, because I know this is something that has come up in many other contexts, but especially in the sort of trying to enforce on a broader scale and address the systematic issues. This is one of the proposals, or granted, it could get a lot of feedback, I think, and I'm sure we'll get a lot of reaction. But part of the issue is really aligning incentives, right? If the general contractor feels like they can get off the hook. Let's see if there are any reactions to this recommendation.
I think my only question here was this limited to just public procurements, or are we looking for the general contractor liability across the board? I think I mentioned that in workers' comp, we do go up the chain. We have that authority.
Yes.
And we use it routinely.
Heather, was that you?
Yes, yeah, I'm sorry to join late, and I'm sorry for the bizarre sun flare behind my head. So the proposal that's on the table right now is general contractor and higher level contractor liability, not tied to public money. This would be the Workplace Fraud Act, which
Okay.
down the chain.
Yeah. I think the reference to public contracting here was partly because there is general contractor liability for restitution in public contracting. There is also general contractor liability under the wage, Sarah and Jenny can correct me if I'm wrong about this, under the wage payment and collection law. There's a provision that allows for general contractor liability in construction contracts under the wage payment and collection law, I believe. So on the restitution side, there's a fair amount of precedent for holding general contractors or primes, contractors further up the chain, to your point, have them accountable. That is not true under the Workplace Fraud Act. And given the fishering particularly in landscaping and construction, which are the two sectors that are covered, that is a significant impediment to sort of meaningful enforcement, that the enforcement group has discussed at some length.
That's interesting. I think that's a useful way to frame it, perhaps, is to say it's already there. It's just in a narrower scope, and it's not really getting at the violations. John,
But this would go up the chain. That was the discussion at the NDE meeting, was that they cannot compete if the upstream was able to do this and get away with it without getting punished either financially or actually kicked off of those contracts for a period of time.
I mean, I think, again, this is a concept, is sort of accountability through the contracting chain is, something that is at least potentially a solution to the erosion of labor standards through this classification in contracting. And since, it's not confined to construction, but it is relevant in the construction world, kind of in the first instance, because there's definitely tons of contracting in construction.
Yes.
So that's where it sort of first presented in the discussion, staff discussion, I think, surrounded that. Yes. Right, that is absolutely something we heard from FEE stakeholders, particularly those who are smaller businesses starting out. Get some footing. Yeah.
Well, and sorry, maybe I can like physically raise my hand. But I thought what like the chairwoman was bringing up is also interesting, because there's the idea of like we're looking at it in public contracting because there is the restitution piece in workplace fraud, but then they're right, as the chairwoman and JFQ were saying, like we cannot, can apply broadly for liability up the contract chain. And so would we want to, so there's the option of it being broad or being narrower, and what we recommend to focus on public contracting.
So what I thought I heard the AG's team say was that the recommendation is to do it broader than public contracting. Is that correct? Sorry, the flare. I think you're nodding your head.
Yeah, yes.
I'm sorry I missed that.
I'm so glowing, but
we are dazzled by your brilliance every day. Okay, so yeah, that's what I thought, but I think that's a good point to sort of elaborate on in the report, because there's certainly a couple potential scopes, right? You could focus on public contracting, but it seems like the issue is obviously one that extends beyond public contracts, and so we can kind of explain both potential scopes and make that clearer in the report if task force members are comfortable going beyond the public contract. I just want to kind of specifically ask that. Yes, I see nodding. I hear yes. It's okay. All right. This is closely related to the next point on consequences for non-compliance, and I recognize that, of course, we're focused heavily on the Workplace Fraud Act, because that is in fact the statute that, directly addresses the issue the task force is talking about. But if for some reason, your agency has a statute where you feel, and especially from the tax side, if you feel that there should be something else that's more explicitly called out in the solutions, we're very open to that. This is talking about some of the debarment and licensing tools. I don't know, John, if you wanted to say anything to this point.
We are obviously we're working on the legislation to be able to do that, but it really comes from the enforcement, them telling us that there is an actual infraction, being able to work from there.
Mm-hmm. Right, although it is, I guess, to the secretary's point, it feels possible that when we're talking about consequences, there are a number of our different agencies that might find misclassification, right? UI could find and does find misclassification. Workers' comp can and does find misclassification. Comptroller can and does find misclassification. And it certainly seems possible that, again, to the secretary's point, that the input may not, for the consequence, need not only be triggered by Labor's Workplace Fraud Act, could potentially be triggered by findings of misclassification under other relevant laws as well. And that feels like that could potentially also serve as a coordination, tool, to our first point.
We are, I think, and we can flesh this out a little bit more, obviously, speaking of the public contracts piece, there is some debarment language out there now, but being clearer on that and
the Workplace Fraud Act is not grounds, the violation of the Workplace Fraud Act is not.
no, but
grounds.
other
Yeah.
violations that would be misclassification violations are grounds for debar, like some of the things that would be related, like tax violations or other things should be grounds, I believe, for debarment. That's the question. But I do wonder about, is that the right scope? I guess that's the question.
Certainly something to look at. I don't know if,
Do you have jurisdiction over debarments, and is that a whole separate due process?
We have to work with DGS.
no, it's
The Board of Public Works.
Oh, so this is.
It's the Attorney General's office, I believe, Heather can correct me if I'm wrong, who has to refer the debarment charges or do whatever it is that happens there, and then it's the Board of Public Works that has to actually hold a hearing. There's under current, I think it's Title 16 of the State Finance article.
Yeah.
That's the process. It's a
Okay.
two-step process.
DGS doesn't have to make any kind of finding, they just implement on the back.
I think so.
Yeah,
I-
my understanding is the sort of the AG's office and it's the antitrust division sort of prosecutes them. But I don't know. I don't know more details of that at this point.
Maybe we can do a little digging around this to make sure we kind of understand the process a little bit more for the recommendation. Okay, great.
So under current law, you can't be debarred for workplace fraud and misclassification, and we're proposing a legislative change to make that one of the other additional penalties. Okay.
Potentially, yeah.
I mean, I think the way we're gonna couch it in the report is not specific bills or not, but say like, these are like policy levers that could be used, because we all recognize like we're still like Governor's still working on his like legislative, pieces. You all may have legislative pieces, external parties may have them. So I think we'll just set them out there as ideas,
Right.
and then we can figure out who wants to use it.
Potential solutions.
Yes.
Right, or potential ways to address the challenge, a particular challenge. And this particular challenge, it could include a range of solutions. One of them being, this is a gap, like very specifically, the Workplace Fraud Act is not part of, or not grounds for debarment. It's not expressly. And that's kind of a narrow piece of another.
One question, would we need legislative solution or a policy solution to increase fines, like triple fines?
For
For not
Workplace
being
Fraud
com-
Act violations. So that was done last year. There was this year, still 2024. This year has gone on.
It's a different FY year.
Dog year. Yeah. So the 24 session, there was a bill, HB 465, that increased penalties for knowing violations of the Workplace Fraud Act, which themselves usually require some additional initial non-knowing violation to precede a knowing violation. So I know our shop so far has not identified an instance of a knowing violation, at least through December 5th, 2024. Obviously, as we start doing more enforcement, that is a possibility, but the fines for that were triggered under the Workplace Fraud.
One other question, forgive me if I speak out of term, in regards to what we can do or laws that already exist, but What about like expanding the ability for Department of Labor to do stop work orders or anything around it?
We have a new, an updated stop work order ability and regulation, but I know, I think there's a question of how often we exercise it, and there were some questions about the thresholds, I think.
Yeah, right now, stop work authority exists only on, to essentially enforce a restitution requirement on a public works, construction project. So if there's a determination, or reasonable belief that there has been underpayment, not according to prevailing wage on a public works project, there, the commissioner has the ability to issue a stop work order under some circumstances. So that is the scope of the trigger for stop work. Currently. There are a number of other states that have much broader stop work authority. New Jersey probably has a.
Would that be
process.
helpful someone else?
I just don't know if it could be done, but yes, I mean, I think there's, I think there's real strengths to it, it would get a lot of pushback. Private industry. New Jersey does have a broader one, as the commissioner just said, robust statute.
The investigators and also what police force, so to speak, is going out to the construction site and saying, all right, we're gonna chain your gates, get out. That's just a whole nother layer.
Yes, it's a whole nother level. It's
Yeah,
a whole other level.
And you'd have to hire specialized people to do that, and getting more pins right now probably not
True.
realistic.
That's probably right. Although I believe in New Jersey, it's their wage and hour investigative
unit
staff that actually does that, because they're the ones who go out to the sites, and if they see, any of the number of things that could trigger stop work implications, there's a process internally to ensure that it's appropriate, consistent, et cetera, but they have the ability to do that, and they don't call the police, I don't think, to do that.
Yeah, it's so complicated, because you could have plumbers on site who are all union, all W-2, but then you have somebody, digging trenches simultaneously side by side on the work site. And and they have misclassified workers, so you're shutting down the whole site.
You don't have to.
Okay.
Oh, really?
It's not an either or a toggle switch, right? It is a tool, certainly the way New Jersey uses it, and the way I think we interpret our statute is that if there is, one trade in which there has been, underpayment or restitution finding, could issue a stop work order solely for
Just to that
trade.
one company that's on the site.
Right, or to the trade, so
Or-
like, there's it's a
That's piece of work.
a lesser included,
Mhm.
you could stop work on the entire site, and actually New Jersey has the ability to stop work on other sites as well, not only, if they find problems with X contractor on this site, they can not only shut that site, but another site that same contractor is working on. Our stop work authority is site specific, but the way we interpret it is as a lesser included. So we don't have to say all work has to stop on the site. We could say this trade has to stop on the site. Or we can say this contractor has to stop.
These are the thresholds we're talking about, right?
Yeah,
That we operate by.
the scope. Right, the scope of the law is what I'm saying. I mean, New Jersey also has a provision that says that when a stop work order is given, the employer contractor has to continue to pay the workers. And that, from a basic sort of fundamental point, that makes sense, because
Otherwise, everyone's.
otherwise you're hurting the very people that you're.
Oh, yeah.
at.
Yeah.
So that feels very,
Oh, we have a landlord who would love us to give a stop work order. Because she doesn't want to pay for a building engineer. So he would like, bring it on. So, yeah,
Happy to
the
talk
continuation
Yes.
of salary and benefits is really key. I mean, I think it is a good idea. but we'd expend a lot of political capital.
Right.
A lot.
Yeah, I think I'm just brainstorming freely without
Exactly, yeah.
understanding
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
is possible.
Just another thought of thinking of what sort of our agency's role could be in sort of consequences for noncompliance. I know it's not as doesn't have as much teeth, I think, as a stop work order, but a business's good standing with SStat sort of has an incentive of its own that people will, try to operate, solve any sort of violation that's in place to return to that good standing. So if, say, we had a list from Department of Labor that they had found businesses that had been found in violation of Workplace Fraud Order, Workplace Fraud Act, they would be required to solve that and then provide us a certificate to return to good standing. So that would just be another sort of consequence for noncompliance.
Good point. Thank you. Exactly. Like you want to make sure people have all kinds of incentives to want to cure.
I mean, I think that would require another change in statute, but
Yeah,
could be.
because if we have an injured worker and we found that there was misclassification, that person's an employee, and we deliver that information to you, then what do you do? Then find them not to be in good standing? I mean, that seems like a whole nother sort of due process, opportunity to defend and be heard and all that. Not that else.
You guys must have a process now, right, Bob?
Right. We have certain requirements where people have to, it's like certain utilities, when they register with SStat, they have to show that they've, registered with the Utilities Commission. They, if people have gone out of good standing, we get certifications from other agencies, like the Comptroller's office will have local finance office, local jurisdiction finance offices that have to provide some sort of certification that we require before we return them to good standing. So it's not unprecedented that this would be a bigger requirement that might be seen to go outside the scope of what is defined as good standing right now. But it's potential to say, if you're operating in violation of some law, we're going to take you out of good standing status.
Yeah, I like it.
Right, because that happens now, right, for like on the tax
On the
side,
tax
right?
side,
If you
yeah.
fail-
I thought that was the only way.
Out of good standing, so yes. Okay,
But they can cure by paying.
right,
Right.
right.
That's all they
By
have to
paying, but you could cure by fixing your non-compliance too, on a broader front, so. Okay. But let's try to.
Are you offering to put a bill in?
Well, let's almost insert it in the proposed solutions discussion of this section, so I think that's a really important
Right.
lever. Thank you, Bob. Creating a market that favors responsible best practices. Talked about potentially, like talked about them internally at Labor, like carrots and sticks, right? So we were just talking about sticks for a while. Are there carrots, right? Is there a way to incentivize, high road contracting, like people to make sure that they are compliant? This is a very general catch-all idea. Just throwing it out there to see if there are thoughts about, these are ways to try to change norms is by providing incentives for folks to comply with the law. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but.
I mean,
Okay,
maybe you can offer some sort of discounting of fees, when you think about
Yes.
like tax payment, when you pay taxes early, what they will say that early, there'll be a discounted fee. If you
Right,
pay
yeah.
between property tax between July 1st and October, you get a discounted rate. So maybe there's some sort of discount you can have on fees.
Bob, people in the room are like, really? You can do that?
Well, you're just like a wealth of knowledge on so many important things.
Well, the thing is people see the July 1st as the actual bill and the October bill as the late, like including a late fee, but it's
Yeah.
actually the accurate one is October and the July is the discounted rate.
The
So
early is the- oh, I see.
it's all.
I don't think it's that way.
But that's a great point, right? Like, what are the incentives, right? For certain sides, it could be helpful, like in public contracts, but there are other things that are motivating to businesses in other contexts. So, okay. Okay. Employment status test. Somebody's waiting. Very full.
Okay, probably dropped.
Okay. Employment status. I haven't been, others I'm sure have been part of conversations about this, about the lack of uniformity of a test across our statutes. I think we have multiple issues even within the Department of Labor statutes. So I see a couple of things here. There's like fact finding, and then just like there's streamlining fact finding, which I think is, part of the coordinated investigation question. And then there's like, which standard are we fact finding toward? Because a lot of our statute laws have different ones. I know in labor, for example, on a separate related issue like anti-retaliation, we found that last year, like we have all these different statutes with all these different standards, even internally, that makes it very challenging for investigators to figure out what they should be looking for in every given context. Thoughts, reactions? I mean, I think the question is, what's the test, right? Like setting us, revisiting the standard. I don't want to make light of like revisiting the standard in any way. Honestly, is a little bit of a third round. But
I mean,
yes,
we're using the common law definition, but we also statutorily have a presumption of employment. So an ideal test that would bring us all together would first have this presumption of employment unless 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. From your perspective, it doesn't sense to touch your statute.
Right. Yeah. Ours isn't.
Yeah.
But we'd like to all be together.
I think it would be helpful, and I don't know if this is kind of a subsequent staff conversation or here, but my understanding is that there are some constraints that are placed on both UI and on the comptroller under their respective federal oversight statutes or cognate statutes, right? That might constrain changing, one state changing a definition of who is an employee for purposes of, say, tax law, who's an employee for purposes of UI law. Workers' comp, I think, is more of a state by state matter. And employment law is a state by state matter, at least to the extent the state regulates it. But I feel like there's a federal overlay, and I feel like maybe Matt or Terry may have raised this in a previous discussion. And I just want to make sure that we all understand if that's something that could be spoken to today, or, if it's more appropriate to address it in a staff conversation subsequently. I feel like knocking out actually that understanding would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that Matt had to leave to another
I'm
meeting
sorry.
today right now at 11, and Terry was just dropped and came back. So I'm not sure if they.
Okay, yeah, so maybe it's a staff
Yeah, I
discussion
think so.
later.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
can
and
we move to
sorry.
the definition. Since they can't move in our direction, can we move in their direction? Oh, Steve, I'm so sorry. Oh,
No, my apologies. I was just saying, because Matt is off, we can bring this exact question, if they haven't already, to our legal folks and, carry on the staff discussion, just like proposed.
That would be helpful.
Okay, of course.
I think it would be helpful. I have to say, of all the recommendations, this is one where I feel a little bit unsure, because I don't, first of all, I think it could be a little bit of a political lightning rod. And also I'm not sure how much we can really accomplish given some of these statutory questions. So this is one where I feel as though, anything saying like, let's revisit employment status could be a little bit inflammatory. So that's, I personally, of all the recommendations so far that I've seen, I think I'm not sure about this one, but we have been discussing it, and it's definitely something that's been an issue that's been raised by many groups.
I mean, at a minimum, right, coming up with finding ways to streamline the fact-finding process, I think is so that we can build on one another's factual findings.
Yes.
Even if not all of those facts bear in the same way in under each one of our respective agencies' laws, that is still in itself a useful thing to do. And would make, just be able to force multiply, right? Any of the work that any of us is doing. And that's without touching any of the statutory language in any of that.
And eliminate duplication of work.
Right, right. Like if we have a clearer sense of the Venn diagram of like, okay, there's one area where we all overlap, right? If you can prove that central area, then you can prove it out for anybody's statute. Like, I think that's helpful. Okay.
Sorry, could I ask a quick question on this? It seems like, because I also feel like when we talked about this in the policy research group, we kind of had a similar, some similar feelings. And so does it seem like maybe this is one that we want to try to cut? Is there consensus on that?
I think we might want to refine it to focus on the streamlining of the fact finding and like determining what's in common in our employment statuses tests and focus on that as opposed to saying like, let's revisit wholesale tests, because I think that gets us into a whole other universe of actions I'm not sure we're ready to take on at this point.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was going to try to loop that in maybe with the coordinated enforcement piece.
Okay, yes, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And I do think if we can take up Steve on his kind offer to elevate it with the comptroller's lawyers, perhaps speak with UI's AG as well, just to try to coordinate on those issues so that we understand what the hard stops are and what the constraints might be. That in itself would be helpful.
Okay, let's mark that as a follow-up.
Yeah, those are great ideas.
Okay. I assume our note taker is writing down, or our keynote taker is writing that down. Yes. All right. Limitations of the Workplace Fraud Act, expansion to other industries.
I feel like the AG's office.
I was gonna say, I feel like the AG's office has raised this one in the past. I don't know, Heather, you wanted to comment on this?
Sure. Hold on, let me, now I can't turn my, oh, there we go. Okay, it's me and my sunflare again. Yeah, so again, in our legislative proposal, at this point anyways, and I know, I know things will change in the legislative process, but we're proposing that it apply to all industries. And I guess that leaves it to those industries with the most effective lobbying to come and fight for an exception. But certainly we want to see it applied as broadly as possible. At a minimum, home health care, hospitality, janitorial, security. We know what it's on the slide. We know what the big ones are. But our thought was to make it apply to everybody and have people come and argue for it to be accepted or to be removed from that. And I also feel like my internet is breaking up, so I don't know if people are saying things and I'm not hearing it, but.
No,
we're listening.
Okay.
Other thoughts or reactions? I mean, certainly we know that workplace fraud it feels like it's spreading. It certainly seems to be very prevalent in a number of other industries. I think historically there's been fear about opening this up, but I just don't see how, you need to have more tools about this classification in other industries. Like, we have these tools, why wouldn't we do that over time?
And Heather, are you saying that you are going to put this bill in?
It's, that's the state of the draft right now. And I would say like by the end of next week, we'll have like an official, definitely we know what we're putting in and I can share more about it at that point.
Terrific.
Good. I like it.
Thank you. The last area is education and outreach, or the last one we had identified. I want to then open it up to discussion to see if there are other areas we are missing. Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just is roofing under construction? I just wanted, okay. And is trucking on your list? Trucking and drive, and how about ride sharing? Is that on your list?
Transportation.
Okay.
Yeah, we could be more explicit. I think I was just trying to loop them both into transportation, but we could certainly be more explicit.
Maybe better not to be.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that. Okay. I think we need to run to ground the nail thing. So I think that would be a statutory thing. But yes, okay.
The nail thing. You know, I was just looking at some data over the weekend, and it's just a chart of top 10 industries using foreign-born workers, and I was so shocked to see nail salons as the second highest industry.
By concentration.
Yes.
Concentration or by volume?
By concentration.
Yes,
Yeah.
that one is. What's the
It impacts a lot.
Taxi.
Taxi and limousines.
Taxi. Oh, yeah.
But nail salons and personal care is a really close second.
Who did this?
This was published in the Wall Street Journal on Saturday. Yeah. It's huge. They also have it by population, but nail salons is.
Yeah, does it say who did it?
Usually it is the Wall Street Journal research.
Oh, you think
they have
it
a
is?
research unit, but hold on. No, source Census Bureau.
Huh? Okay. That makes sense. Okay.
That's pretty reliable.
Yeah, that's a good point, which that's worth looking at. Education and outreach. We've talked a lot about, a no wrong door approach, like where are businesses coming in, they should all be made aware of their obligations, not just under, this particular portal or website, but you've got them across the board as an employer. And conducting outreach. I think these are fairly self-evident. Other areas in here that people want to raise on education outreach?
We're just gonna add the Chamber of Commerce, the local and state, to the list. I've spoken myself to the state chamber, on these issues.
Absolutely.
Doesn't have to be in the report,
Chamber,
but just wanted to mention it.
Associations, business associations,
yeah.
absolutely.
Trade association, yep.
Is the partnership like with unions and worker centers, it's there, is it like just a codification in the law or like?
I wouldn't
It's just
codify
like
it in law, but I think there are different levels of partnership, right? In some states, they've tried to work more closely, and union folks have themselves been sort of like deputized is the wrong word, but they're able to conduct activities that, there can be pros and cons to that, I think. But certainly, I think this kind of, partnering with all kinds of organizations to get information about people's rights out there. I mean, I don't know that you need a statute for that, but like it is,
right.
It's for sure something that should happen. Honestly, I think with a lot of these things, and especially post-COVID, right? Like we need to like have a more sophisticated understanding of how to reach people a little bit better.
And one of the takeaways from the public hearing that we did is I could see that the unions were hiring a lot more Latino organizers. And so that to me was a changed dynamic, and that brings people a trust relationship where workers are willing to come forward and report. And I thought that was terrific.
I just also wanted to add that we may want to consider also reaching out to the professional organizations like the Bar Association, the Accounting Association, because that is also a violation under Workplace Fraud Act. If you advise someone how to misclassify or what the benefits may be. And so those folks should be aware of that, A, we're watching, and B, that they also could be on the hook for the misdeeds of their clients.
So one thing that came up when we had the MBA focus conversation, I don't see that's here. Some of them indicated it might be helpful as contracts are awarded, that there's a training being done in this area as well. Because they receive a number of other training, but there's never actual interesting training or conference at that point. And I thought that was an interesting idea to actually to leverage, to kind of say, hey,
this is part of your requirement. This is what is classified. This is what is the design work order. So that's.
So we are
And
doing
they had to
that.
certify that when they did it.
They certified they did it.
They did it. They
Yeah.
certified they actually.
Yes,
Yeah.
remember that
Yeah.
conversation?
Yeah, we should follow up on that. We, public contracting under the state prevailing wage law, our, wage and hour investigators attend the pre-construction meetings. And they provide information not only about the prevailing wage law, but are now also folding in information on the Workplace Fraud Act and on misclassification generally. But that's, obviously a small
That's a small
subset
exactly.
of what, of all the construction contracts that are awarded, for all the contracts that are awarded. It doesn't even cover all state.
I think we can leverage that material. And
Yeah.
share it.
Well, and also, we should just have video, right? Like,
Yeah.
requiring someone to go every time, like, that's
Yeah.
impossible. We can't
Webinars are
stand.
like public.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we've had some really great conversations, I think, in the enforcement group that have included, the, STAT folks. And shout out to them because they are a place that most every business has to go. Regardless of whether you think you have employees or plan to have employees or anything else. You know that most businesses know that in order to do business in Maryland, you have to register with SDAT. And so using that as sort of one of the many initial touch points for education on businesses seems helpful. We're also following up, I think, with GASPA, the small and small business affairs group to try and figure out what would be useful to them. I would propose that we actually get a little subcommittee of people on the task force or staff designees to be able to develop materials. And, a landing page at SDOT and little videos and, other things like that, more communications data, people, sorry. Did I say that? More communications, focused people might actually, have better ideas than, many of us on exactly how to do that. And what those materials could look like and how to reach our audiences.
Yeah, I want to add just maybe one more organization here, which is the tax preparers and the CPAs, and maybe honestly a letter from all of our agencies to all employers saying, hey, FYI, there is this thing called the Workplace Fraud Act, and misclassifying is illegal.
Right, and you can be held liable if you.
And here's what happens, right? Like a scary letter.
And adding to that, the insurance agents, because Stacy and I have really come to appreciate how much insurance agent malpractice is going on. Because we've just had too many business people come before us and credibly tell us, my agent told me I had all the insurance I needed. So we absolutely have to have more.
I'm surprised at how often you have to affirmatively ask about it.
Yeah. And see, we're issuing these $7,000 and $10,000 penalties against these businesses. And in addition to outreach, they really should be sued and say, here are my damages, $10,000 because you committed professional malpractice. So I don't know where that's all going, but Stacy and I, we're starting to really get a handle on it as a separate problem that needs a resolution.
Okay, I'm looking through the screen at you, Heather, because I think some of these broader malpractice issues around with professionals, we want to think about how.
Yeah, those are private causes of action now, because if my business, and it was my
Right,
agent.
for me, it's my agent.
Yeah, yeah. But people never think about that, like they call us screaming because they just got a $10,000 penalty, but they're not thinking about, oh gee, I could sue my agent for that.
This is a question if there's some systemic practice.
Yeah, right.
Something else going. Great. Other areas that we haven't touched on, other specific items?
Are we not doing anything legislatively this year except maybe the AG bill?
Well, let's talk a little more. We have some items that are still subject to discussion and further approval. So But
Are they just DOL or, I mean, I'm just talking about the work group of our
I don't-
product. Is there?
oh, you mean, I don't know that we're developing any specific bills
Okay.
as a task force. I think different agencies might have some pieces of these recommendations that they're looking at. Obviously, AG, Labor's got a couple that we're still working through.
I would say that I think it is helpful, we're talking with Labor and the AGR talking because we don't think it makes sense to have a whole lot of different bills on
Right.
the same general subject. So obviously, everybody's got to do their own thing and then be in their own lane and has their own chains of approval.
But
I don't know,
let's, yeah,
it's
maybe,
something to coordinate.
yeah, I was gonna say, let's see, maybe if agency by agency want to figure that out, or we want to have some smaller but follow-on conversations once people have approvals and understanding. As we head into session, I think it'd be good to have that collaboration. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I might have missed it. Maybe there was an email, but I didn't read any of your reports that went to Labor, and I'd love to read your reports, and I'd like you really to read mine as well. And I'd like you to tell me, what do you want from my agency? Because I'd like to give it to you. So as you think about these issues and how we might help you, tell me. I mean, we are going to continue to meet, so the dialogue's going to continue. But yeah, I'd like to read all the reports.
Sorry, which reports are we talking?
Well, just everybody submitted a report to
For end of
you.
year, right?
Just.
The data?
Well, there were two. One was the data and the question was, the mission, it's question 2. The goals.
Sorry, I could jump in. So Chairwoman, actually, I think workers' comp is probably the only one that submitted that, but we could, but it was very helpful. You might see some of the language from you and Stacy in many different areas, but I'm happy to share.
I outed everybody.
But if it's I'm happy to. Sorry, I'm happy to share that around, and also like the comptroller's office shared some really great. The comptroller's office and like unemployment and ASTAT have shared some really great data that we were including in the report. But I'm happy to share around those raw, what was shared with me, if that's as long as everyone.
That's okay.
I can check with everyone.
All go in the report. Okay.
Right. But encourage others, so maybe we can share around what workers' comp sent and encourage other agencies, if you have other thoughts or pieces, right? Like the data is super helpful. We will take out of this discussion, we'll refine and be providing some text. I want to check on the timing of when task force members can expect to see a draft. Sapna,
I'm sorry, I think probably early next week. We'll get,
Okay.
Definitely get something to everyone early next week.
Yes. So thank you. These inputs were incredibly helpful. Other areas, follow-ups, and it sounds like, so a couple key follow-ups, and then next are, if you have anything further that you haven't provided to SEPNA for the report, please do it immediately, because we want to circulate a draft by, let's say, midweek next week. Anything else, other items that you want to share with the task force members, just actions, other developments, other information?
Just one quick clarification. Sapna, do you need I know SStat shared certain data that we have right now, but we also have that other piece where we've added certain questions we're adding to the annual reports that businesses file. So we're going to have additional data in the future. Do you want a write-up of what we're putting in place? We also have information links to unemployment insurance, workers' compensation insurance, worker classification, tax withholding with the comptroller. Those are things that we'll have data on next year, but it's also as part of the outreach piece. Do you want a write-up on that to include in the report, or is that outside scope?
I mean, if you think it's something that you'd like to include in the report,
Yeah, I think it would be great, Bob.
Okay.
Yes.
Sounds good.
Another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to make sure that SAPNA has everything you needed from us. I know there's been information.
Yes, I do. Thank you so much, both to Matt and Terry, who've been and the whole, and to you as well, Maria, everyone. It's been, the comptroller data is really exciting. I think people will be excited to see it. I mean, it's horrible, but it's exciting. It's done a great job.
Great.
We get it. Well, that's sort of what I was asking, but by way of, are you looking for something from each agency to put in the report from each member?
Yeah, I mean, if there's data, I know that I think Stacy was looking into the what data you guys workers comp might be able to share. But if there is data that you have around, you know, what you've done around misclassification, workplace fraud, happy to. That it would be great to include that.
I think what Bob was talking about a policy. I think Bob was you were talking about a narrative, not data. And that's
sorry. If you have a narrative, sure. If there's like policy things that you've done as well that would be great to include.
Right.
Yeah, because I think they've definitely come out of these meetings and participation in this task force. So I think that's, you know, a good action we've taken.
Yeah, I mean, something maybe it's helpful to kind of reshare around to the group, like what the asks are for the report, just so everyone has it at the top of their inbox. And obviously, if there's anybody who you know, hasn't submitted everything that they want, should do that like now.
Yeah,
because
I think, you know, if it's data around how misclassification presents to you, right? Like we see these number of cases, this is what, you know, this is how we experience it. I think it just helps paint a fuller picture, because even these analyses that we have, like those are estimates and models. Things that are grounded in Maryland specific experiences are always really powerful, even if it's not we boil the ocean, but like we looked back and you know, UI has done some of this conference where we looked back at the last, you know, 3 months and like, this is what we see in terms of the incidents, or, you know, in doing our, you know, insurance investigations, like we find that we, you know, 80% of the time we're seeing X, or any of that color, I think can be very helpful to us.
Yeah, I would just add that you know, I think both workers' comp and labor and industry, you know, we have our cases come to us in different ways than, you know, the audit data that UI and the comptroller do. So it's also helpful to understand where the inputs are coming from. So I think at least for L&I's, if this is helpful at all in L&I's portion of the report, you know, we're going to be talking about sort of where are the workers who we're finding? How are we finding them?
Yeah,
because I feel like that is also helpful.
Because you do audits, right? I mean,
we go to work sites. And we look at inputs from a whole range of things to try to figure out where we could be most effective. And obviously in our first year of really rolling this program, we're still very much in the process of trying to figure that out. But we're going to talk a little bit about the breakdown of where the inputs come. Because some of them will come from people asking to be paid their last wages, and they are misclassified, right? You know, the referrals that we make internally to the enforcement group, many of them are not necessarily construction or landscaping. They're people in other industries who came to our wage payment and collection law to try to exercise their rights there. And we know they are also misclassified. So that's part of where our inputs come from. So that's an example. And I think that's helpful because again, it's self-selecting based on the individuals, but learning the kinds of issues and places where people can be misclassified, I think goes to the Secretary's point of helping everybody understand how this problem presents in different places, in our different shops and different ways.
I just wanted to make a comment for the comptroller. So our audits, you know, we weren't focusing on misclassification before, but now that we know that's the kind of data you're looking for, we can track that. So when the audit's done, we can look at, okay, the number of misclassified employees, the tax amount, the industry, get a little more specific with the industry code. Where did the lead come from? All these things, we can start January gathering that data. So by the end of next year, we'll be able to provide more, you know, just better quality data. We're not used to keeping track of all of that. So going forward, we can put that in place, and I am excited. We've hired a supervisor for that team, which we didn't even have one, and we're hiring 2 new auditors in January. So then we'll have 4 auditors. So that's just some positive news I wanted to share.
Thank you, Carrie. That's great.
Control. Oh, control. Oh, I know.
Yeah, comptroller. So right. So I'm talking about the audits for withholding taxes and, keeping track of, because we audit for several different things. So we're going to, focus in on what parts of these audits are misclassified workers. They got 1099s instead of W-2s. So whereas before we just looked at the withholding in general, there could be several discrepancies in different areas, but now we'll kind of break that data down. So by, the end of next year, we'll have a clearer picture of what's going on and what we're seeing.
And I was really curious to learn whether 1099 employees have a higher delinquency rate because of, having to pay the employee and employer contribution. Because as we think about how to discourage misclassification, we have to try and reach the worker too. And oftentimes they take these jobs and it's not until the following April that they get a big tax bill and they go, oh my God, I don't have this money. And then they wind up in trouble with your office, and it becomes, sometimes just every year they're on a payment plan. And I'm just wondering if that's sort of a piece of this that we might do something about by means of outreach.
Great point.
Yeah, I mean, that would be hard for us to track because I work for business tax audit. And then you're talking about personal income tax, which is a totally different, section that we don't really work together. But, down the road, maybe that's something that we could, follow up on.
And I bet you all know it. It's just a different unit.
Yeah,
I know you've been looking
Right.
at
It's all
closely.
comptroller, but
Yes, you all have been looking
we
at
each
it.
we each deal with our own taxes. So I'm business tax.
Yeah.
We can follow up.
I'll draft a letter to the comptroller. You can tell me who to send it to, and we'll just, we'll just get it out there as something to be thinking and looking at.
These comments are making me realize a couple important things about this report, and we can spend the time we have just kind of crystallizing, there's the process, people get the draft. I'm sure as you look at it, it'll spark other thoughts and think, oh, I want to share this about what my agency's doing. I want to spend a couple minutes thinking about the purpose of the report. Obviously, today we focused on some of the policy recommendations. I think that's one of the pieces, right, is to make suggestions for potential action. I think another important piece is, of course, to highlight both the findings and information that we've uncovered. This is really a sum up of what we've done over the course of the year, even though our findings are, our meetings are public. I think it's also an important moment to highlight the work of the task force together, but individual agencies as a whole. And, I really appreciated what Bob said is like, because of these discussions, we've decided to take these individual actions. I heard what Harry was just saying, right? Like, like people have changed their orientation. Maybe they were already doing it anyway in part, but the task force, I think, has helped to galvanize that. And I think we really want to use the report to highlight those actions, both to give credit to our agencies, because we have a lot of stakeholders that care about this and feel strongly, and they don't always understand, like, the duck's feet are paddling below the water. They just see a duck sitting there. But also, I think to the point of it, of people being on notice, right? Explaining, and you can bet, like, those CPAs and other professionals and lawyers will look at this report with interest. And if we note that these are the actions that our regulatory agencies and enforcement agencies are taking, I think that's a really important signal to send. So this is a very important use of the report. Other thoughts on what it would be most important for the report to accomplish from your perspective?
I mean, I think the fact that we are collecting best practices, I really commend you all for doing that. Really incredible meeting. We heard from 3 states. I think it's
someone
that
to
was
say
my
that-
favorite meeting.
that
Yeah,
we're-
that's
that
so
we're trying
good,
to
so
find,
helpful.
right?
Yeah.
Um, um, yeah. And then I don't know if you're planning to report anything around like the stakeholder meetings and what we've learned.
Yeah, we should do
right?
an overview, yeah,
Yeah.
the activity of the
Let's learn
year.
from
Yes,
No
that's a
doubt.
great point.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason of holding the stakeholder meetings is to gather the information, right?
Mhm.
About how misclassification presents in the state, so for
Mhm.
sure. I think that's gonna be a significant part of it.
Is it worth to outline the future of what we're gonna be doing? Like, we wanna listen from these other stakeholders, or we are gonna develop these other MOUs, or I don't know, like a glimpse to the future.
That's a good point, and actually, we should, since it's our last year meeting, we should actually talk about what is that future?
Yeah.
I know, with the task force being reinvigorated this year, and, so what year are we? I'm sorry, maybe it was the end of 20, anyway, this year.
Beginning.
Same as this year. Okay, again, it feels a long time ago.
You're entitled to feel it, right?
But regardless, we obviously had in this initial inaugural year, sort of this sprint to this report and really more of a diagnosing and building relationships year. I think we'd love to hear task force members' input about, but this is an ongoing body. So like what is the right cadence that makes sense? And Maria, to answer your question, I think maybe in the report, first of all, people should feel free to input in the draft. I think I would suggest making it kind of more open-ended in the sense like we're going to continue to focus on these kinds of areas or activities without necessarily being specific about like what form of stakeholder outreach or engagement or what form of partnership with local associations, because I just think we're going to want to continue to develop that. But I absolutely agree. Gesturing towards a forward direction makes a lot of sense. Would love task force, but we don't have a next meeting set. I know like sort of there's like the enforcement where it feels like also in this big picture framing and policy setting, like now a lot of it is getting to the, and getting the MOUs in place. Like now it's the information sharing, it's the coordinated enforcement. It is like the nitty gritty action that's not a big principles meeting. That's like the people who are doing the work continue to coordinate. Yeah. But certainly we could think about sort of like a quarterly cadence to highlight, troubleshoot, continue to learn. Be curious if folks have thoughts about what's the right.
I thought we had a meeting scheduled for January 31st. Is that?
I thought I was.
It was when you're the last Friday of every month, I thought, or something.
It might be that at the start, we set a whole bunch of default meetings. I'm looking at Ashley. She's like,
Yeah, I don't-
me too. I know.
On a 9.5, yeah.
You looked into the new year already? That's amazing.
January 31st.
Oh, we do. Well, I stand corrected then.
So Chairwoman, is it the policy meeting? Because I wonder if I extended
It's a
those.
policy
out.
and research.
Yeah. So we could also we can keep those if they're helpful, or we can also pull those down if they're not helpful.
Yeah, I was going to suggest if we could have subcommittees that meet, right? Like the policy research is one, definitely enforcement needs to be talking. I mean, at least monthly, right? And I don't know. And then I agree with your suggestion, Deb, about like communications /
Education.
materials, education and outreach. Who should be planning the stakeholder meetings? Honestly, they should be outreaching to folks.
Or developing materials.
And
we need some actual deliverables.
Yeah.
So that SDAT can put them on their website. We need actual deliverables so that when people go out and do outreach, either they bring it along, then we can think about a more focused outreach plan for the task force. But I definitely think one of the next steps.
Yes, we need to form a little
designate a subcommittee. Capable staff people who are, gonna be able to effectively communicate around this issue. The enforcement group, I have confidence will continue meeting. We have tons and tons of work to do, so.
It might be that, so definitely that should keep meeting. Policy and research, I defer to you all if we should keep that going or it might be that some of the communication stuff actually melds with that, because a part of that is, it's like enacting, like, how are we communicating the policy, right?
Right.
Like, where are we, the effort is to reach these people in these arenas with this kind of message, right? I think that's going to be part of it. Actually, I realized I failed to acknowledge and introduce Dinah Winnick, who joined us in the meeting today. Those of you in the room can see there's Dinah. She's our new communications director at the department. So
Congratulations.
that's why we're glad she's here. Obviously you'll be part of that working group. But that also, so let's do that. So that we'll take that as an action item out of this meeting. And then a couple other things. We also need a plan for the rollout of the report. And I want to recognize we need to build in time. So we'll need to get your inputs to the ref draft next week, but then you're all going to need to run it up your chains. You're going to need to run it by your communications directors. We need to think about a rollout plan for the report. Is that an event in early January? Like, what is it? So it may be that, even though I might say not all of these might be working meetings, like in terms of, nitty gritty, it may be that we want to have some kind of public meeting where we sort of unveil the report early in the year to place an emphasis on it or something, or we may just do it by press release. I mean, I think this is something we need to consider and discuss. I just want to put that on everyone's radar, especially as we do holidays. All right, are there, if there's no further business.
I have
Yes,
one more thing,
Maria, of course.
Can you just recap the next steps as far as policy and how policy is going to be represented in the report, and then how we're going to talk about it in the future? Because
So,
it's not
right,
for
so-
this session, so.
Yeah, so I think there's going to be this discussion based on the slides we saw and the feedback. It's going to be a significant part of the report.
Okay.
Of areas for potential policy action. Then I think there's a question of like, who's bringing what bills, right? And part of the reason we want to get it out before session is maybe some, members of the assembly would say like, oh, that seems really important. I want to take up that, banner and work on it. So that's why we really want to get it out soon. And also want to publicize it a little bit. We can think about whether that is just a release. Is it a briefing, right? Sometimes you can do caucus briefings, we could do committee briefings, we could brief staff, like just to let them know what's in the report and what we think is important. Obviously, I think as everyone nails down their agency and the governor nails down his legislative packages, we should all collaborate again, because I suspect it will definitely be, I know there will be bills that will touch on at least some of the recommendations, either among the agencies participating or from outside stakeholders. We've already heard from outside stakeholders. They're planning to seek sponsorship of bills that touch on this area. So I think that's the next step. I think it's good that we have the policy committee meeting held for late January, and maybe a key, focus of that can be, okay, what bills would y'all get, sign on, exactly. What do we know about who else is introducing what? Because I think there'll be a lot of information by that time.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Can I make one other suggestion on the policy side? One of the things that's in the executive order is some research, whether that's either commissioned by the task force or, grows out of the task force's work. I just, in terms of keeping that on the radar, and maybe that is, again, already. But
You mean some research, meaning what?
like research into, say, the prevalence of misclassification or which demographic groups or occupations are most, represented, how it sort of overall presents in Maryland, and, maybe some further detail on the impact on, individuals, other businesses, so.
So I think the Century Foundation report, which we're hoping they're going to issue in January, now that's a, it's an extrapolation of a model, but we have been talking with them about doing that. But certainly, this is an ongoing thing, right? Like I do think it's important to continue to, and part of it is you all are, the research I think we want to present in the report in part is information from each of our agencies about what we see. Steve.
I definitely think that, putting it out and having conversations with legislators is great. I would just say, on the government affairs side for the comptroller, our legislative package is mostly already baked. Not to say that we can't do anything else, but that would probably require like a bunch of meetings internally in order to get done, because we set ours in October, I think. I just want to flag that in case things do pop up.
No, I understand. We had to say, we had to submit the governor's office like September 1st or something. So like we had to put a lot of these things on the table already. Yes, completely agree. But I do think, and as we just so you know, the AG's team is still looking at some of their thoughts. We have some proposals in as well that are still in vetting and discussion with internally with the governor's team. So so I think some pieces will emerge for sure.
Thank you, Secretary.
Sorry, Secretary, could I jump in a little bit on next steps real quick? So I've been taking pretty good notes on this conversation. So we'll make sure that like everybody's comments are reflected in the proposed policy solutions. And then if they're like, I'll re-up kind of the asks that we had asked for a little bit earlier this fall around like, policy narrative and data. And so if there's more that you'd like to send, if task force, members and agencies can get that to me, as soon as possible, this week, early next week, so we can incorporate that into the report. And then, when we send it to you all, there'll be obviously opportunities for additional feedback. Then we'll try to incorporate that, we'll incorporate that, and then it will go out again, you'll get it again for final approval. So I just don't want anyone to, be nervous about, anything getting published before there's been a chance to review it. And we are going to publish, the slide deck on the website, so that if members of the public want to provide, any feedback on the proposed just kind of policy solutions, they can do that as well for the next week. Be happy to take feedback from them as well. I think that's it.
Okay, we did not approve last session's minutes of session, but we will have them, I think, from prior meeting. We'll approve them minutes for that one and this one in the next session, if that's okay. Yeah. If there's nothing else, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Okay. Great. Thank you, everyone. Everyone in favor?
All in favor?
Yes. Yes. Okay. No one opposed. With that, we are adjourned. I hope everyone has a happy holiday season. And there's a lot of work to get done between now and the end of the year, so it'll be a busy one. I hope a